Hello, my name is Evelyn Fitzgerald. I'm the Executive Director of Social Venture Partners Chicago. And on behalf of my partners, my board, our staff, I welcome. We are so thrilled and it's heartening to me to see so many people spend carve time, precious time out of their afternoons to join us to discuss this critical issue that's facing us here in Chicago and across the country. So thank you for joining us. While I'm thinking, Evan, where are you? Oh, there he is. I just wanted to give a shout out to our SVP partner, Evan Dudusky and Bain, for hosting us today in this beautiful room. For those of you in the room that don't know SVP Chicago, at a high level, what we're trying to do is change the way we do philanthropy in Chicago. We are a community of folks that believes strongly in engaging in philanthropy by sharing our kind of skills-based time and talent and networks, as well as some philanthropic dollars, to support grassroots community-based organizations that come recommended to us by communities leaders for making outsized impact in their neighborhoods, that are led by people that have a direct connection to the issues that they're solving and quite frankly, may have been overlooked by traditional philanthropy. And part of our model is really focused on learning. And so we are here today to learn about a critical topic, as I was saying earlier, that's facing us all here today, that I think when we learn more about that and the consequences, the intended and unintended of living in poverty in Chicago, that all of that learning makes us smarter and more intentional in our philanthropy. So this is, some of you have joined us earlier this year for the first panel discussion that we hosted with the University of Chicago's crime labs on gun violence. That was a high-level overview. And so much conversation was generated during that panel discussion as well as afterwards, that it became very clear to us and to the labs that this was kind of the beginning of a series of discussions on a topic that ranges in such breadth and complexity that 1 2-hour meeting is just not. It's just kind of kind of skimming the water. So for us, we are super excited to be able to co-host with University of Chicago's Crime and Education Labs this second conversation, part of a series of conversations about gun violence and what organizations and individuals can be doing to stop that cycle of gun violence in Chicago. And we are very excited to be able to do it with the Urban Labs, which, for those of you who are not as familiar with them, is one of the preeminent organizations in not only in the city, in the country, but in the world for the research that University of Chicago is known for doing, but for the way that they are intentionally kind of using that research to push policy ideas with major urban areas that have been proven to be effective. So with that said, I'm going to welcome to our impromptu stage here, Kim Smith, who is the program director for University of Chicago's crime labs and education labs, to introduce the topic and to bring on our moderator and our panelists. So Kim.
Thank you so much. Round of applause. Introduction, and thank you all for being here. We are really excited to be able to be in conversation and to welcome our esteemed panel very shortly. But before we do that, just wanted to level set and share some, some facts and some data. We are after all, the University of Chicago. So who are we as an organization? And you got a little bit of information from the introduction, but we are the University of Chicago Crime Lab and Education Lab. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan research center based at the, Mike?
Yeah. It'll help our folks on Zoom, I think, hear you better.
Is this on?
Yeah.
Oh, there should be a little toggle.
Is
There
this
you
better?
go. Perfect.
Great. So we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan research center based at the Harris School of Public Policy. We've been around for about 15 years, and we partner with the public sector and nonprofit sectors to really make sure that government is a better portfolio manager of its resources. And what do we mean by that? Well, the government in Chicago, in Cook County, Illinois, around the country is responsible for the failures of our education, gun violence, and criminal justice system challenges, and they are also the only way that we can truly have impact at scale in all of those issue areas. The amount of resources that government spends on public safety, on education, it's in the billions of dollars every year. So by improving the effectiveness of government, increasing the ROI on their investment by even 5%, we can unlock hundreds of millions of dollars worth of social good. So to do that, we do a few things. The first is we partner with organizations to identify and design promising programs and solutions. We're good at a lot of things, but we are not necessarily well suited to be social service providers. So we partner with nonprofit organizations who are on the ground doing the work to identify and unearth those promising solutions. And then we harness the intellectual curiosity of the University of Chicago, and we subject those programs to rigorous evaluation. We want to understand which programs work, for whom, and why. And if we're able to identify effective programs, we want to partner with government to scale. And again, as our theory of change, it really is core to the partnering with government to scale is really core to our theory of change. We want to make sure that the city of Chicago is investing in the programs that work to improve the response to gun violence, reduce the harms of the criminal justice system, and make sure that education opportunity is available to all. Our vision, so for the past 15 years, we've been doing a lot of work locally to really operationalize our theory of change. We've been partnering with great organizations, some of which you'll hear from very soon, to identify, test, and scale these interventions. And in the next phase of our work, we really want to have impact at scale. Not just impact at scale in Chicago, but nationally. How do you make sure a program that is proven to reduce violent crime arrests by 50% is available not just to 600 young people, but to 6,000 young people and 60,000 young people? That is really our frontier question, and some work that we're really excited to be able to pursue, not just in Chicago, but in many cities around the country. So now thinking about some of the data that motivates our focus on gun violence. What you're looking at here is a graph of homicide rates in OECD countries. And you can see there is American exceptionalism in all the wrong ways. The United States stands apart from similar high-income countries. When we break this out and look at it in a little bit more granular terms, we can see that the cause of our divergence is due almost entirely to the gun homicide rate. So the non-gun homicide rate in these countries is remarkably similar. What's different is our gun homicide rate. And that really does drive our focus on gun violence as the core issue that we focus on as an organization. We also know that depending on where you live in a city like Chicago, but also cities like Baltimore, New York, Los Angeles, your experience with safety depends on where you live in that city and what you look like, unfortunately. For example, when we looked at the data, we found that in 2021, the homicide rate for Black Chicagoans was the highest it's been on record. And this is important for a few reasons. The first is that as a city, we often say, well, it's not as bad as it was in the 1990s. That was the peak of the crack cocaine epidemic. Nationwide, homicides were, reached a high water mark. And that's actually not true. In Chicago in 2021, we had the highest homicide rate on record for Black Chicagoans. I think the other really important takeaway from this is the gap between groups has grown, the safety gap. And as we think about solutions to addressing gun violence, keeping in mind that solutions must also take into account the impact on different populations. For example, we know that mass incarceration and this country's default response to gun violence, policing in the carceral state, has had a disproportionate impact on Black people, Black men. So any solution that we want to bring to bear to address this gun violence crisis must also be mindful that that same population that has been disproportionately impacted by gun violence has also been disproportionately impacted by our country's response to gun violence. Something else that we want to lift up and tee up as part of the conversation that you'll hear soon is that in Chicago, and this is the case but around the country, Chicago, the vast majority of shooting victims are not school aged. So we prepared this this analysis in 2016 initially as the city of Chicago was experiencing its last surge in gun violence, and there was a conversation about what should we be doing as a city to make sure that lives are not lost. And when we looked at the data, we saw that the vast majority of programs for violence prevention at the time were actually geared towards the under 18 population. So there was a significant service gap for the 80-90% of individuals who are most acutely involved in gun violence. And we are glad to say that, after really interrogating this data, there has been a growth of programming for this older population, and yet there is still tremendous need for more programming for this over 18 population. And while it is the case that the majority of victims of gun violence are, not school aged, we have seen a reversal of recent trends. So unfortunately, the pandemic reversed progress that we've made in keeping young people safe. We've seen an almost 50% increase in the number of school-aged youth who have been victims of shootings and homicides since the pandemic. And this really is hopefully a call to action, not just for those of us in this room, but for us as a city. Our city's young people have tremendous potential, and our failure to respond to gun violence is costing us not just the lives of precious young people, but also the future of our city. Another point about kind of school-aged in victimization. So when we look at the data to understand of the young people who are victims of shootings and homicides, what was their last touch point with Chicago Public Schools? We did this in response to some work that CPS wanted to do after the pandemic to improve safety. And what we saw was that more than 90% of the victims of gun violence were not enrolled in school at the time of victimization. This is the case, 90% of the school-age victims of gun violence, of young people under the age of 21. And this is important for a number of reasons. One, we know that education is one of, if not the most protective factors against future gun violence involvement. And this, I think, really underscores that point. Another point is that education or gun violence exposure makes it harder to achieve success in school. One of our affiliates at Princeton University did some analysis and some research, and he found that if a homicide takes place on a block where a young people is living, that student will test as if they've missed 2 years of school. So the kind of vicious cycle that we have in a situation where we have gun violence, we have young people who are disengaged from school, it really does inhibit our ability to achieve success in so many different ways. And so really focusing on this population of young people who've been disengaged from school, we think, is a priority. For some food for thought, our estimate was that before the pandemic, there were 25,000 young people who had not graduated from school, did not receive a high school diploma, were still eligible, and had not transferred to another district. So that is kind of an estimate of the population of disconnected young people. Since the pandemic, we estimate that there are an additional 16,000 young people who meet that criteria. So we've talked a lot so far about some of the challenges, but I want to make sure in teeing up the conversation on the panel that we start to think about some of the solutions and the opportunities. And one that I'll talk about quickly is that we actually know a lot and can use this information to start to implement solutions. So we have access to a wealth of data, of administrative data in the city of Chicago, and we should, and we must, we think, use it to improve how resources are allocated. Not just at a city or even like neighborhood level. We know, for example, a handful of neighborhoods are where the majority of shootings are taking place. Can we make sure that investments are targeted to those neighborhoods? But even within neighborhoods. So what you're looking at now is some analysis that we did this past summer to really inform the city's thinking about summer planning. So how within a certain neighborhood, how concentrated is gun violence? This map was interactive. You could zoom in, you could zoom out, you could look at different features. How do these blocks relate to where Chicago Public Schools buildings are located? Are they close to parks? Could we do park activations? How do you prioritize summer job recruitment in the neighborhoods or in the specific blocks where young people are living and where gun violence is most concentrated? So there is a lot of data that we have in the city of Chicago that can be brought to bear to start to think about solutions at a place-based level. We also have a lot of data on the characteristics of young people, of adults, and that should also be used to help us focus resources. So several years ago, we looked at the young people who were victims of a homicide in Chicago public schools. And what we saw was that students who are leaving Nancy B. Jefferson, which is the school in the Juvenile Temporary Detention Center, face an extraordinarily high rate of future homicide victimization. Students who were leaving Nancy B. Jefferson were 44 times more likely than their peers to be victims of a homicide. So how are we using this data? How are we then wrapping these young people in all of the supports that we have possible that we know are evidence-based? And to that point, there is also a growing body of evidence about what works to reduce gun violence. You'll hear about some of it shortly, but just briefly now, we and others have generated a lot of knowledge about the promise of cognitive behavioral interventions. So we understand that the majority of incidents in Chicago actually stem from altercations, arguments that escalate and turn deadly because a gun is at hand. And cognitive behavioral interventions have been proven in many different contexts to reduce violence among youth, and not just youth. We actually recently released the result of a study where we used cognitive behavioral interventions in conjunction with a training for police officers and found similarly promising impacts: reduced use of force, reduced discretionary arrests for Black residents. So this core ingredient, cognitive behavioral interventions, we think holds tremendous promise. One of the first programs that we ever evaluated, Becoming a Man, we found a 50% reduction in violent crime arrests, a 20% increase in high school graduation. We evaluated a version of this in the Juvenile Temporary Detention Center and found a 21% reduction in readmission. And we've also evaluated it in conjunction with two organizations as part of Choose to Change. And this program, a much more intensive version of the program, 6 months, 2 different organizations, but really at the core of it, cognitive behaviorally informed. We see a 48% reduction in violent crime arrests, and that is persisting up to 3 years after the program has ended, which is really rare in the social policy space. You usually see fade out, but we're seeing impacts up to 3 years after. So this it's something that we know, it's something that we can act on as a city. We've also evaluated a version of this programming, cognitive behavioral interventions combined with transitional job support and wraparound supports, and we found that for every $1 we invest in a program like this, like Ready Chicago, we yield $3 to $7 in return. Our conservative estimate of the savings per participant is about $184,000. I'm not a portfolio manager, but if I were, I might choose to make this investment, not only for the obviously the social and moral imperative, but the cost return to society. So with that, I will now turn it over to our esteemed panelists who will share a bit more about some of the programs that I've mentioned, and also will, I think, wow you with their expertise and their experience. So round of applause for our panelists. Welcome. While they're coming up, I'm going to introduce my colleague, Dartavius Dorsey. He is one of my favorite people to work with. He works harder probably than any of us at the Crime Lab and Education Lab, just trying to make sure that our city's young people have opportunities to succeed and to thrive, and I'm hoping that he'll talk about some of the work that he's leading up right now as part of the Back to Our Future initiative on the panel. So Dartavius, I will hand it over to you, and I will hand you this mic.
Thank you, Kim. Happy Tuesday, everyone. I know it's 4:45 and we're downtown, but we're gonna get through this. Before I start, I have some instructions I have to call off. So can everyone please, by all means, fill out the newsletter sign up form that's on the table in front of you guys. So before we close out, can you please fill that out? Thank you. I'm gonna set this here. If I have any more instructions, give me the signal. I am Dartavius Dorsey, and I'm very vibrant and energetic, so do not allow this cane to fool you. It's just a temporary fix. But we are in this space, and I am so honored to moderate this panel with such esteemed panelists who's doing amazing work in the city of Chicago, not just the city of Chicago, on a national level as well. And so I want to thank you guys. Kim did an amazing job narrating the picture of where we are now. We're in a room full of friends, and everyone in this room wants to know and learn how we can collectively and still come together to change the negative narrative of what's taking place in our city. And I'm so honored to have you four up here to just talk about the experience based upon your expertise in what's taking place and how your organization is doing a better fit of being impactful in the city of Chicago. So just picture me as a male Ricky Lake. And I promise you guys, I'm real good with time, so we will end on time, but we will mingle afterwards. And so I'm going to start off by just asking my amazing panelists, starting from my right, to just go over a few minutes each. Fill us in about your background, your expertise, and your line of work. And currently, what are you doing with leading prevention and intervention and reentry work? Catrice, I'll start with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dartavius. It's been a pleasure working with you. So I want to say from brother to brother, I appreciate you and the Chicago LAD team so much. Thank you all for joining. My name is Catrice McNeil. I'm one of the lead program managers at UCAN. I'm originally from New York City, but my wife is from Chicago, so I've adapted this as my second home, and so are my kids as well. So my background is in marketing and merchandising. I graduated from Fashion Institute of Technology, went to Southern Connecticut University, where I played basketball in Italy as well. A few minor injuries delayed that, but during that opportunity, I wanted to be that person that gives back to the community always, even when I worked as a director of the Boys and Girls Club, or even when at Italy, seeing the slums, seeing what people go through, and seeing how can I be a change or that person that makes a difference. So I wanted to be a part of that change, and when I came to Chicago, I knew that social service work is something that I wanted to do, that I was passionate about, and that I wanted to do something to help Chicago and others be on that map and make a difference in this world. So I'm happy to be here in front of all of you to tell the story and then what we do in our organization to progress and lead these young leaders that we have today.
Thank you.
That's a hard thing to come behind. No, but good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kobe Chapman, and I serve as program director for Youth Advocate Program. My background, I earned my Bachelor of Arts in Criminology and Forensic Science from Southern Illinois University, and then went on to earn my Master's in Program Leadership. So taking those talents and expertise, I served with an Options Network school called Excel Academies for about 9.5 years as a school counselor. And from there, my want or yearn for social responsibility, for philanthropy, pushed me into the realm of politics. And so currently I too serve as the second ward alderman for the city of Harvey. But through this work from an intervention level, our young people are in dire need of resources and exposure and opportunities. And so being able to serve as a catalyst for that through working within Youth Advocate Program as a program director. One of the big things that we seek to do is asset map our community so young people have an understanding of the valuable resources that sit within your community. Oftentimes when I was just telling someone, when I walked into Bain and Consultant today, I was like, this is luxe, this is nice. But unfortunately, our communities are just not as cute on the south side of Chicago. So when you don't have a pivoted perspective through your view of what you see, it totally can have an effect on, the distance or the journey in which you'll go. And so we are hopeful to shift that narrative and create a bridge where intervention will lie to support young people holistically, and not just the young person, but their families, because, a house is a home with everyone, not just solely on the child. So that's been our efforts, is to be very collaborative. And so I'm looking forward to seeing how us as good stewards in this social responsibility realm will be able to edify this work. Thank you.
Now I have to follow that. Hi, everybody. I'm Nicole Millbrook. I serve as Chief Program Officer at Youth Guidance. I was so moved by everything that Kim said as she started this out. So I think that was a perfect opening for this. And I came to this work by way of behavioral health. So I got a bachelor's in psychology and then a master's in counseling. And as I went through my education and learning about behavioral health services and counseling services, it became very, very clear to me that the field of psychology wasn't necessarily developed with people of color in mind. And I saw the connections though. So I spent most of my career trying to figure out how to connect the science of behavioral health with communities of color, where people tend to be underrepresented, underserved, and also underestimated. So I've spent a lot of my work in child welfare, in community mental health, violence intervention, teen parenting, things like that. And most recently found my way to youth guidance, where we're doing school-based counseling and mentoring services for young people of color. And the thing that really draws me to this prevention work is helping young people really think about their behavior in different ways, think about the social emotional learning, how you relate with other people, how you relate with the world, and those being just regular normal life skills and just as important as academics. And that absolutely being some of the work, some of the learning that can keep you alive once you leave high school. So that's just been, it's nice to see the data and how it validates how important that work is. Sometimes people think working with young people is just, oh, you play with kids all day, but man, it's so much more important than that. So yeah, that's what brings me to this work.
Thank you.
Marlon Chamberlain, and I am the Executive Director of the Illinois Coalition to End Permanent Punishments, which is a mouthful, so we go by NPP.org. And the focus of our organization is two things. One, it's a human rights organization led by individuals with arrest or conviction records. And the two things that we focus on is, one is centering the leadership of those that are directly impacted by the criminal legal system. And then the second thing that we focus on is restoring rights for individuals after their time has been served. And so our ultimate goal is to eliminate what we call permanent punishment laws, formerly called collateral consequences, but we changed it from collateral because collateral suggests that these laws were accidental. And what we've learned is that they weren't accidental, that they were intentionally placed for individuals with arrest or conviction records. And so we call them permanent punishments because ultimately that's what they are. They follow people long after their sentences ended. What led me to this work, in 2002, I was sentenced to a 20-year federal prison sentence. And in 2010, a piece of federal legislation called the Fair Sentencing Act, which really changed the ratio between crack and cocaine. And the only difference between the two is baking soda, but that's a completely different story. But my sentence was reduced to 14 years, and so I ended up serving 11 years in custody. But when the Fair Sentencing Act passed, what that did was it woke me up, and I became curious as to how did these community-based organizations make this happen? Because it changed the atmosphere of the institution I was in. People were hopeful, and so coming out the system, May 29th, 2012, I came home running. Like I instantly got involved with the faith-based organization who introduced me to community organizing work. I also was a founding member of a coalition that went on to pass, right now I think we've passed over 15 bills that either remove barriers or created opportunities for individuals after that have an arrest or conviction record. But ultimately, in all of my learning from doing this work over the last 10 years, two things stood out. One, if we continue with this one bill at a time approach, we would be doing this work for the rest of our lives. And I have other things in life that I want to do. And so we wanted to speed up the process. So what we did was we studied and researched every statute in Illinois code to identify these permanent punishment laws so that we could introduce a wholesale legislative package where we could eliminate a number of barriers at one time. And the sort of value behind this is that like no one should be punished for an arrest or conviction record for the rest of their life. But what we also understand that there are some convictions that people will cringe at. And so what we want to create is pathways for everyone to be free at some point. And we also want to move away from punishment and look at how we can support people better so that they don't reoffend. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing, in terms of the leadership development, there was a lack of organizations that were really focused on building leaders that were directly impacted. In most instances, we're used as storytellers or policy validators. And so what we're attempting to build and show is that Marlon is not exceptional. Marlon was just exposed to exceptional opportunities. And we want to expose individuals to these same opportunities so that they can grow as leaders and also lead and really drive this change that we're seeking.
Wow. Thank you. Amazing. Friends, you see the bios are on the table, but it's always amazing when you see and hear from them. We have esteemed panelists, and I again thank all four of you guys for the outstanding work that you're doing. So I of course work for University of Chicago Crime and Education Lab, and prior to coming over, I worked for Youth Guidance. See, my former CEO in the audience, Michelle. One thing I discovered here at Labs, it's a research institution, and we love research, data, outcomes, impact, upticks. It warmed my heart to read and not really be in the inner circle of what was taking place, but externally, a collaborative front that took place with the Education Lab and Youth Guidance, particularly, working on womanhood. And I spent 5 amazing years there, and I know the work is prevailing. Dr. Nicole, this question is directly to you. I want you to elaborate on the study that was recently released. We're telling on the services that WOW was produced by that study. Can you elaborate on that for us?
Sure. So first I'll start with just a little overview of the Working on Womanhood program. WOW is a group counseling program for girls, school-based. We run circles for 10 to 15 girls at a time at schools, and using narrative therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, and cognitive behavioral therapy, among other things. And there are 5 core components to it. So there are values that in every lesson is based on one of the values. And the girls are learning social emotional learning skills, A lot of it is very much focused on identity, understanding who you are and how you relate with other people. A lot of it is about relationship development and how you show up day to day in your relationships. And so that's the WOW program. WOW counselors are embedded in the school, often come from the communities that, of the schools that they're serving in. And we were able to have a study done where over 700 girls were studied, and the results were amazing. It validated what we already knew, I think, is that anecdotally we knew our programs were impactful, and we knew that the young women were better off for having had a WOW counselor in their lives and for having had a community of girls that they got to go through high school with and they got to commune with and they got to learn and grow with. The study validated, though, that in addition to all of the things that we knew, the girls also had reduced depression and anxiety and PTSD symptoms by the time they had at least 1 year in the program, which we expected that there would be some changes, but there were statistically significant changes in this symptomology from 1 year to the next, which is great. One of the things that has come out of the study, and questions that we get a lot, is that many of the girls that were studied and many of the girls that are high school age aren't always seen as troublemakers, aren't always seen as the people who need the attention or who need the intervention, because they're not acting out, because they're still coming to school, they're still making grades, they're still functioning. And what we've learned from this, and I think on some level we always knew, is that girls continue to function even though they're not okay, because they internalize. So we've got some kids who internalize their depression, their anxiety, and their PTSD symptoms, and some who externalize. And the ones who externalize are the ones who are causing problems in their environments, and the ones who are causing problems and being inconvenient for everybody else are the ones who get the attention. So when children are inconvenient for the world, then the world wants to do something about them. The ones who are not being inconvenient for anybody, who are just being quiet and suffering silently, those are the ones who aren't getting the interventions. So that's what we've learned. That's what the studies told us. And we're happy that the study is now telling the world what we knew.
Amazing. Wow. Thank you, guys. Thank you for the service. And I know there'll be some follow-up questions afterwards, networking session. We can discuss how our friends can be of support in making sure the implementation of that study is profound. Over the past year, almost a year and a half, I've been working along with CPS on for me, a very cool initiative called Back to Our Future. And it's working with some partners, the state, City Hall, and CPS, but more so making sure that our young people who have been disconnected and disengaged for close to 18 months and beyond is set back into a profound avenue in life. And they're working with some amazing partners to get them back reacclimated into having a profound pathway. I'm going to direct this question to Contrice and Kobe first. I want you guys to talk about, if you can share what you have seen with the implementation of Back to Our Future. And it's going to be a twofold question. What you have seen thus far with the implementation of Back to Our Future, and then also, can you share what your organization have been doing as far as resources to make sure that population is still a sound and heard, but have the valuable education and opportunity as such as others?
Definitely. And I too want to applaud you all's efforts on the data and you leading this front, Dartavis. Dartavis has always been a steward of wanting to see young people do great. So I'm just thankful to work in partnership with you all. But largely, when you look at the Back to Our Future program, these are young people who have been out of school for about 6 months. And so what we've seen is through direct, holistic love, support, literally a day-to-day check-in, this old-fashioned method of loving on a child is what's working. Because while the data is important, I think a large piece of our young people have never had a support system as such. You know, over 30% of our young people, their grandparents are raising them. Parents are incarcerated or for whatever reason out of the picture. And or if that parental factor is present, I'm not sure that they're being parent-led. Maybe the parent too also needs so many supports. And so you have a revolving cycle. But what we've seen is through our approach, we have an advocate assigned to a student or youth along with an assistant director and then myself as a program director. And what we do is no matter really the level or the title, we all sit down with that young person when we do our intake process. And our intake process is extremely lengthy. It takes about an hour and a half or so. We take a really deep dive into what are your short-term goals? How can we support you from a legal standpoint, family, finances? Like, what are your needs? Let's plainly state them. And what I've seen is the same young people who haven't been in school for 6 months are in attendance daily to our program. And what that means is that they just needed some love and some support. I think another twist to what we do, we go and pick our young people up and we drop them off. So there's never a gap in where could you be, what could possibly happen, because we're going to provide a means to an end. And so that circle of support and just literally doing the basics, being a genesis, if you will, to opening up the young person to something as small as let's go open up a bank account. Let's make sure we have all of your identification that's needed. Let's just make a certain that you're a good citizen, that you have all your things and supports that are needed. I think largely these are the resources and strategies that is supporting our young people who are disengaged. Our young people need someone who literally looks like them. I'm not saying that someone else that does not can't provide the same support, but it certainly makes a difference when you can align or envision yourself in the person that you see, that you're looking up to. That could be a 180 difference from who that person was in your own family or in your community. So I think we're hitting things on a more social, emotional, on a deeper level. We're changing mindsets and creating a new cool around what good citizenship looks like and just being a good neighborhood steward and what really being a neighborhood hero looks like. It looks like, you know, being that go-to person for all good things. So we're changing the trajectory and shifting the narrative by just showing love, and really getting back to the basics. And I think another piece in that, you know, when we think about collaborative partnerships and we think about a means to an end, we have to start that the moment we sign the student up, because we know that a discharge date is upon us. And so we're looking at partners like Workforce Investment Opportunity Act, the state of Illinois, the city of Chicago. My hopeful thought is through arenas like this that we can create more of a conversation around how do we edify a young person. And what I mean by that is like, how do we put a young person in an entry-level position at $42,000 a year with a 401k plan with medical benefits? And so we've totally taken someone that used to be a part of a benefit program and given them a new ability to step out on faith and do something that they've never seen before, and possibly without even a bachelor's degree. But we have to open up what that looks like and create spaces and make this a more normal thing that you can have opportunities where you don't have to sweat literally to earn your keep, that you can beat your mind down. You can read a lot, you can research, and you can be just as innovative instead of using your body for force. You know, I often see our young people going to a warehouse. We were just talking about this, me and K-Trees, but we have to really provide better opportunities. You know, this low-level thinking, our young people deserve to be in a room and be able to also make the big decisions for what's going to happen to the next generation or what they would like to see in their own communities, but to be able to sit at a table such as this, and not necessarily just at the round table of the warehouse. So that's my hopeful thought, that through mediums like this, that'll create a whole new way of how we identify resources for young people. Thank you.
Thank you. Catrice, before you start, I want you to, because Kobe spoke so eloquently, that was so perfect. So you can speak from the lens of the resources and the strategic lens that your agency is doing to support that population.
Yes, absolutely. No, excellent work. We work so closely together in our resource that's from Breakthrough to YAP. But the one thing I want to say, because we're all in this together, it really starts with the people that we bring on board. So you're only as strong as your next man or your next woman. So I really value people that come in that's really about the cause and really about getting to the root of the evil. Social service is so difficult. It's not for everybody. It's not for everybody to feel that some people don't feel comfortable doing outreach. Some people don't really feel comfortable spending that time. I get calls over the weekend, 24/7. It's a 24-hour missionary. And I call it 24-hour mission because you have to be available at all different point in times. A kid doesn't want to hear, they call you on the weekends and you're not available, that you shut them out. And then you won't be able to gain that respect, that confidence again. Once you lose it, it's gone. So we start with the hiring process, making sure we bring on a team of coordinators, clinical therapists, career specialists that are really committed to the cause and really helping out the youth and the community that we serve. One thing is a lot of these youth, and Kim brought up the statistics so eloquently, is because they've been through so much trauma that they suffered, because of the violence within the community. We lost 2 individuals that were very close to us, DeQuan Smith and Mr. Anthony Sims. The violence happened, was gun violence, and it happened on a Saturday night, just going out and hanging with some friends. It was on the news as well. So we pride ourselves in bringing on those individuals that really care and that will go above and beyond, and we call it relentless engagement. Relentless engagement means taking no for an answer. So when we go out there and do our outreach with our outreach team, like Kobe said, titles do not matter. I'll be an outreach specialist. I'll be a career specialist. I'll help the clinical team. Whatever it is to do to engage that young person, that's what we're going to do. So when we do that relentless engagement, we go to the next door neighbor, we go to the person, we go to schools, we go out there and outreach so we can find that person. If it's a new address, if it's a new transcript or anything that we need to go out and reach out to those individuals. Because when we have these conversations with the individuals and do the intake process, they stop going to school because of violence, because they've been bullied. Because some parents were stopping their youth because they had a sibling that was murdered. So they don't want them going back to school, or they don't feel comfortable because they don't want to lose another son or a daughter. So what we do with our organizations, just like Gap of Breakthrough, but social service is so important because we provide that love and support. It's not just about gym activities, but we have a whole curriculum in place where we do our clinical therapist team, we do meditation, we do music therapy. We go on career pathway events. We have a partnership with PepsiCo. So we go on career avenues or career pathway events to get the person outside the box. We do cooking. We do mentoring. So we have a whole list of things lined up for individuals to have pretty much like a full-on school day. So that's to prepare them to when we want to engage them and get them back in school or to get them back working to do the GED. We have healing gardens. We do soccer, baseball, kickball games. And we're all involved in those individuals. So it's not only do we do those one-on-ones that they have with their specific coordinator, career specialist, or clinical therapist, the whole team's involved. It's a whole family. Just like we have our violence prevention team, just like we have our clinical therapist team, our workforce development team, you have to provide all those wraparound services, and they want to be around people that care in their investment. And I think we have a perfect team in place to put that in place, from clinical therapy to doing that momentum and Apex, to also doing a debriefing with them if we have to do community building with them to see their environment, to see what's out there. Especially some of them haven't been to Navy Pier. Some of them don't even know what downtown looks like, Michigan Avenue. They like nice things, Gucci, Prada, Fendi, but have they been to the store? Have they really researched, know what the brand stands for and the background behind it? No, they don't. So with our individuals of coordinators and teachers, we help them go step by step in that process, building their minds, expanding their growth and opportunity so they can see what their future looks like ahead of time. And that goes with all of us investing. So whether it's data, whether it's outreach specialists, whatever the role is, like Kobe said, titles shouldn't be involved in that. We all help play a part in that investment in the future of our youth.
Thank you for sharing. Dr. Nicole, would you guys want to add any thoughts on supporting disengaged youth? We're on the elevator. We're going from the first floor to the 7th floor, so give me your thoughts.
I just want to add one thing real quick. I want to highlight something that Catrice said, and it is really the importance of supporting the staff that do this work. The continuity of these relationships with young people are so important, and the only way that we can maintain continuity of relationships is if we can keep the staff healthy enough to be able to do this work year after year. So it's just really, really important. All of us are in some type of a leadership position here, and it's important that we have the resources that we need to be able to provide the support that we need to the staff so that they can be what they need to be for the youth that they support.
I will just quickly say that my federal case was my 4th time in prison, and at not one point did anyone ever ask me why I kept doing what I was doing that led me to prison. And why I think the relentless engagement is so important is because it's helping people get to the why and not the what. Because in most instances, we focus on the what a person did versus the why. And I think when you're able to build that relationship with an individual through that relentless engagement, that they feel comfortable to open up and to talk about the why, and then you're able to support them.
Awesome. You keep that mic. So let's talk about some of the promising work that you have seen with reentry on the city, county, state level. Can you give us some synopsis of like what's taking place and like how you creating that impactful work?
Yeah, so I would start on the city level. I think that there is a lot of momentum in terms of really looking at how to create opportunities, and then also breaking down a lot of the silos that exist with a lot of direct service providers. And I think just to name the fact that like Willette Benford was recently appointed, but she's transitioned out now, but she was the first director of reentry for the city, says a lot. And the responsibility, or one of the responsibilities she had, was really sort of bringing folks together to think about how can we create sort of a collective approach versus folks just sort of operating how they traditionally have done. On the state level, I would definitely lift up the work that's happening with my organization in terms of looking at how we can address the sort of permanent stain that people have with an arrest or conviction record. And I think from looking at the data earlier, just using Chicago as an example, there are probably 6 zip codes that have the highest number of individuals with arrest or conviction records that folks return to. And these are communities that are already underserved, underserviced, and then you add on top of that the statutory barriers, and then the shame of just having a record. Is almost like you're forcing people back into a lifestyle. And so the work that we're doing statewide, which is our approach, this is a multi-year statewide approach. And so we're not just focused on Chicago, because we've also identified that this is a statewide problem, that the folks in East St. Louis and the Quad Cities are also experiencing like the barriers of coming home and not being able to really fully participate in society. Some of the early successes that we've had is that we recently passed a bill called the FREE Act, which removes the lifetime barrier for individuals to act as an executor over an estate. This was something that hit home with me. My father passed away 2 years ago. He appointed me the executor over his estate, but because of my now over 20-year conviction, I couldn't act as the executor. So we were able to introduce a bill that passed through the legislature and was signed into law as of August 1st. So this is the work that we'll continue to do around the state, is really trying to engage folks, to engage in like civic participation, to get involved, but to also to bring various stakeholders such as research organizations, reentry organizations, anybody that's willing to listen, because this is not a Democrat or Republican issue. This is really a human rights issue, and we believe, again, that once a person has completed their terms of incarceration or whatever they may be, this person should be able to move on with life.
Thank you. Turn that mic off for me. That you see, I have an amazing panel. They can talk. We can extend this for another hour. But before, and I have a few more questions, but I want to open it up for Q&A. before, thank you, Kim, she's been walking around. But before I open it up, and I probably can take two, possibly three, Edie Eric is in the house, and so I want you to please provide some perspective of the conversation and where we are and where we can be as a thriving Chicago. And so I know I was opening up a question, I asked you a question, but I wanted you to get your perspective, and then we'll take two questions behind that and close out.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Eric Davis, and I'm the executive director of the Base Chicago, located in West Garfield Park. And I've run that program for about 7 years now. And we opened 7 years ago, and we haven't closed yet. That's because that's the type of service that's needed in our community. And another thing, I, with great intent, selected that community for us to start in. I was actually working for Major League Baseball when Theo Epstein came to me and asked if I would go back to my roots and run a program that I am really accustomed to. And I said I would, as long as it wasn't in Hyde Park, Wrigleyville, or Sauganash. And he said, no, I want it to be in North Lawndale, Inglewood, or Garfield Park. And my partner and I selected West Garfield Park because we thought it had great need. And in being open 7 years ago and staying open 24 hours a day, even though it says on the door from 4 to 9, we stay open because our kids have called in the middle of the night because a relative has been killed. That can't wait until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We've gone out because I've gotten calls at 2 o'clock in the morning and she's crying saying, he broke up with me. I don't know what to do. I have daughters. I know I have to get up out of my bed and go help fix this. When we talk about nonviolence programs, so people really get the gist of it, and the information they're giving is just spot on. I wanted to kick my feet up and put it on the desk and say, why are you asking me any questions? They gave you every answer. But, you know, employment and housing and food and education, that's nonviolent programming. That's a nonviolent program. Because much of what you see on the nightly news from West Garfield Park and Inglewood is about unemployment, housing, food, lack of, and a terrible education, or lack of. I'm in a community that arguably has the worst performing schools in the city and state, arguably. That has the highest unemployment rate in the city, arguably. That is a food desert. There's not one grocery store in Garfield Park, not one. That has the worst addiction problem. And now you wonder why you hear about gun violence when the #1 employer in Garfield Park is Pulaski and Jackson, who sells the most heroin in the state. You know, we've had a gun problem and violence problem here for now exactly 100 years. And that was when the Irish and Italians were here 100 years ago. We romanticized Al Capone and those guys. You know what the biggest problem was? Gun violence. 100 years ago. 100 years from this date, they were doing this in this city. Now, it tends to be black and brown boys. But now we have someone else that's here, coming by the busloads. They're called migrants. I call them migrants because I call my own family migrants. Because when my family got here in the late 50s, from down south, the same way the migrants were treated, that's how my mom and daddy were treated. And all the migrants from Alabama and Mississippi. Except these migrants have a different issue. You know what their issue is going to be? Most of the migrants are from Venezuela. They look like me. They came through Mexico, but they look like me. But they have one problem. They speak Spanish. So in this city that is divided, you tell me the address, I'll tell you what the people are gonna look like. Where do black people and mulattoes go that look black but speak Spanish? Where do they go? Not black enough, not Hispanic enough. I have been everything that they're talking about. When I was 13, I was a victim of gun violence. I was a victim of gun violence in 1974 because I was gangbanging. How I got involved in gang activity, honest to goodness, 2 guys saw one of my 11 sisters and my mother walking down the street and commented about their behinds. And I said, I'm not having that. And these were older boys, and I stepped to them. Fought them the next day. I was gonna fight them every day until they respected my mom and sister when they walked down the street. You can talk about everybody else's mama all you want to, but these, you're not gonna say anything. And you know what the guys on the block said? Man, he's a dog. We gotta pull Shorty in. And you know why I went in? Because that guaranteed my family would have respect in the neighborhood. Wasn't this ceremony, it wasn't me saying that I want to be a gang member. I got to survive over here. I'm not calling 911. I'm going to go take care of this business myself. And that has not changed. That has not changed. So I want to tell you the biggest mistake I've ever made in my life. And also, bro, I was an athlete too. I was an athlete. I was a Chicago police officer, gang member, got on the police department, and they sent me back to work in my neighborhood. Well, that's not true. I actually got the Award of Valor, and I selected to go back and work in my neighborhood, which was Cabrini Green. And I was in the gang unit, and they assigned me to the Black Gangster Disciples in Cabrini Green. And then the days that I needed to get rest, they assigned me to the Black Gangster Disciples in Robert Taylor. I loved it. You scared to go in Cabrini? I eat good every day, hoop a little bit, see all my people. That's why it's important to want to be there. Love being there. The city, actually, my first 10 years on the job, I probably should have gave them some money back. That's for real, because I loved it there. And we were there, and one day walking to school, the Jenner School, and I say Jenner School because that's the school the mayor taught at. There's a little guy named Danny Davis. His name was Dantrell Davis. Remember that name. Google that name. Write that name down. He was walking to school with his mother, and they shot out the building and killed him while holding his mother's hand. There's a lady that called me, probably the greatest community activist this city's ever had. Her name is Marion Stamps. Write that name down. Google her. Learn about her if you want to know how to make it work in the city. She calls me up and says, all right, Eric, you got to do what you do. And I'm like, well, what's that mean? And she knew that I had connections to the gangs because you got to go talk to your people. I talked to Larry Hoover. He said, we got to do something about the GDs. GD's the largest gang in the city. And you know what Larry Hoover said? We're on board. And then I went and talked to the Latin Kings. And they said, whatever we got to do, we're in. Partnered with Marion, guys from the Cobras, biker gangs, and we set up the peace treaty in Chicago after Dantrell Davis got killed. Google it. Don't believe me. Google it. But this is what upsets me about what I did. I listened to people that talked and didn't know anything. I didn't trust myself as the expert because you know what people said? We gotta stop the gun violence. Yeah, we gotta stop the gun violence. So we're gonna go stop it. But we stopped it, and we had thousands of young, unemployed, uneducated men just standing around. When what we should have done is went to the businesses first and said, what's your buy-in? The only one that was bought in was us, community service providers, and the gang members. The city itself wasn't buying in. You even had guys in the city saying, well, they're still selling dope. Well, yeah, that's how they eat. And now I'm asking you all, do we really have to do another study? And I get it, the data's what the data is. And I do believe that there is more black violence, especially with younger black boys committing violence. That's real. But it's still about housing, unemployment, food, daddy gets out of jail, got nowhere to go. You know who the best policeman in my neighborhood was for me? His name was William Davis. His name is also on my birth certificate. When he told me to be in the house at this time, no back talk. He handled it. When we can build families, and you build families how? By having a father and a mother able to provide for their kids. When a guy goes to jail and now he has a life sentence because every time he goes to get a job, he can't put his name on, well, I'm gonna put my brother's name. So why? He did his time. So these things, the gun violence is the last thing you hear. All these things they told you about the front end, you handle those, the back end will take care of itself. So, thank you.
Wow, amazing. I'm getting signal. All right, we have time for one more question, so get on the elevator with me. We're gonna go from the first to the ninth floor. ED Eric, thank you so much, so profound and impactful and inspiring as always. Does anyone have one question you would like to ask the panelists by chance? And feel free, if you don't want to do it in this setting, like we will have a networking setting where we can like actually mingle and talk, and you can go directly to the panelists to ask any unsung question that you might have. Keep in mind, we all are friends, and it's a collective impact that we're trying to build here.
I have a question.
Oh.
What makes you hopeful about the work that you're doing or our city? I think there's a lot, and we highlighted unfortunately some of the challenges, but there's also a lot of great work happening. So maybe we can just end on a hopeful note, like what makes you excited about the future? Yeah, if you could just talk about that.
Awesome.
So I would say I recently had an opportunity to visit Israel before all of what happened started. And it was an 8-day trip, and they went to really sort of like introduce us into a lot, like the complexities of just the Middle East itself. And at the end of it, they sort of asked the same question. And one of the things that I shared was that I met a lot of bridge builders that the news doesn't show. Like there were folks from both sides that are committed to work together that the media just for whatever reason doesn't show. And I think it's the same here. Like there are a lot of good folks here in this city doing great work. It's not amplified and we don't hear about it. So it's almost like they love to amplify the violence and what's happening, but they don't talk about the folks that's on the ground that's actually striving to make Chicago a better city. But that's what keeps me hopeful. I always just think about the number of people that I know that are committed to making this city a better place.
So one of the things that makes me hopeful is hearing stories from young people and alumni about the impact that the work has had on their lives. Those of us who do this work know that we just work, and we work really hard, and there is so much work, and there's never, like the mountain of work never gets smaller. Like Dartavius and I were just talking about before this session started, the job security of the amount of work that there is and how much there's enough of it for all of us, and there will always be enough of it, but we work, and we don't, like you never check everything off the list. but every once in a while you talk to a young person or you hear a story, whatever, and they talk about the impact, and you're like, this is why we do this. So that's what makes me hopeful.
I think what makes me hopeful the most is, like a Facebook profile, that's how we see a student. They talk about all their deficiencies. But then as you cultivate this outstanding relationship, you get in a report, you get to see a whole different young person than how they've been categorized. And I'm just really happy when I see kids be kids. Not kids that have to do all adult-like things. When I see them playing basketball, jumping rope, talking with their friends, who put up the best social media posts, like the conversations that should be consistently happening. And through love and a foundation built on purpose and just really pouring in from a holistic approach, I think we can do that and so much more. And so that was what makes me hopeful. And then just sitting in this room and speaking from the lens of politics, you have to put the pressure on the leaders. Governance, open governance, and transparency has to stand at the forefront. That's something that I stand foundationally on in the city of Harvey. I don't care who's doing what and who may not stand with the greater cause, but I always do, and I always try to initiate them. So if you don't like what the leaders are doing, get them out and make way for fresh opportunities for new, young, old, in between to come in, and the people who want to be involved, because everything is a hiring process. It looks different across the lens, but everything is an initial hiring process. The people that you put in certain positions to be able to go out and do the work. So carefully select who and what you want or intend to be for the near future. And I think with that and added good of the work that we're doing collectively, we're going to see to it. Thank you.
I'm going to keep it short and sweet. We hear these success stories over and over and over again. But what makes me hopeful is the individuals in this room, my brothers and sisters in front of me, to the left of me, to the right of me, and individuals like that gentleman, my brother, that I just heard his story, his testimony, and what he does to be able to continue to stay open for individuals 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and give their life. Because we all know the work that we do is 24/7. We don't have a break. There's no break in it between. There's no time to say, okay, we cut off this phone because there's lives here at stake. But meeting with individuals and seeing the work that we do, I'm hopeful because we all share the same vision and the same dream, the same aspirations to do what's right and to really change our city and make it a better place. So if we continue to do that, share resources, don't hold anything in, but use those wraparound services, just like me and we talk. Doesn't matter what agency, doesn't matter what color, it doesn't matter about that. It's about really helping to shape and mold our city and continue that journey, those community, and continue those resources so we could do better amongst one another and our children's children. So thank you.
And as I close out, I'm gonna start with you, Catrice. We love to do it. There's a call of action. So
Yes.
Can each of you panelists just share some insights of what our amazing friends and this audience can do to help continue the work and also bring valuable solutions to what we're trying to change in this city?
Yes, of course, we meet in board meetings, we meet in settings, but I think the most important thing is to actually come out and visit some of our social service sites, really get that insight and really dive in, see the kids in action for yourself, see a day of programming. Not just about donating, because sometimes we ask at our organization, how do I donate? Go to www.uk. It's not about that. It's about you really getting the picture and seeing the day-to-day activity to see what goes on and to see how it changes the kids' lives. And then speak to some of the other individuals that are there, because I have individuals that might not have been able to make it today, but they may be on the entry level end, but talk to them, see how the program works, see how it runs, so that way you can get a better understanding of our community, and how it works. And then when you see that, you can be the judge of it and take with a grain of salt and see how it did. But when you see those faces and when you see those kids and when you see those added on stories of how they graduated, how they got a job, how they were able to take care of not just their guardian, their mother, their father, their siblings, but also their children as well, you'll get that better picture and idea of how much we can change lives and continue to do that together.
Thank you.
I would say, like he mentioned earlier, there's no grocery store in West Garfield. And you may have some colleagues or someone knows somebody in this room that can immediately support the need. I think a lot of times the media portrays various ethnicities in a particular way. And so we have to break that barrier down. So if you had an internship or an externship opportunity or workforce development thing that you're doing, or maybe some of my young people can even know what a venture capitalist is or what SVP is all about. How do you charge you all with the social good of actually bringing young people inside of this building and letting them go on a tour? And, the work stuff like My Block, My Hood, My City, I'm sure you all are familiar, but let's take that and bring it on a smaller level. It's almost like an exchange program. Y'all come on out to where we are, and then we come on out to where you all are, and allow us to asset map and just see, like, we all kind of have the same things, they just look differently. And so, but what looks good sometimes feels even better. So we just really have to break down. There's a lot of systemic racism, and unfortunately, on both sides, we're looking at how the media portrays it. So you already come in with the thought process on a young person. And when we look at, when you did the cost breakdown, when we look at, again, being socially responsible, we want taxation with representation, right? And so that's really important, but the only way you're going to see your greater good is you too being at the forefront and seeing it. So I think through opportunities, workforce development, like you said, before we get to violence, there are so many steps before we get there. It's like you heard about the fable of kids on their way to school, and by the time they haven't eaten in the morning, they didn't see mom, and then when they get there, the teacher asks them, "Why isn't your pencil sharpened?" But there were so many other things that happened throughout the day before they even hit, or what they saw on the way there, the dilapidated housing, the local grocery corner store that you have to go to and get your hot chips. I've been that kid as well. But these are the things that are going to change. And so we need a grocery store in our communities. We need more social and recreational opportunities. On the south side, just the Rand Joan Kroc Center on 119th, that's probably the immediate go-to outside of some of the park districts. So we have to figure out ways to make our areas very bright, very beautiful, very colorful, places where you see vitality, where people walk their dogs and they're running adjacent and riding their bikes, and health is like, that's a monarch. That's just what happens in the community. Not where you don't see kids out at play. If you pass 63rd on that, you don't see too many kids standing out, or everything is done with a very microwave, immediate. It must be done immediately for public safety, to get out the way of danger. So just imagine the mental state, and all of us up here can attest to it. So, that's what my challenge is. Talk with your friends, your CEOs, those major partners who want to come back and invest from a capital improvement standpoint in our communities, and that really is going to make a big difference.
Thank you.
Two things. One is, sounds simple, but it's not, unrestricted funding. And honestly, that it sounds simple, but in order to run these organizations that keep the support in place for the programs that we've talked about, there is infrastructure that many grants don't support. I mean, that's just the reality of it. So trust the organizations to do the right thing with the funds. And the funders that do that, we love them because they allow us to do our work the best.
Unrestricted is also important for data and evaluation.
It is.
For the nonprofit organizations, that's what I love.
Good job.
The other thing is career exposure opportunities for young people. Like, everybody here works someplace, and everywhere you work has got lots of different roles. And our young people don't necessarily get exposed to all the different types of jobs that they could have in the world. So just being able to go to a workplace and see what different people do can be huge for them.
So I'll be quick. My wife's organization has a sort of a call to action that I like, that has the body, the ballot, and the buck. The body is get involved. Like we've heard folks say, show up to meetings, coalition meetings, show up in Springfield, just show up in community so that people can see you. And the way that you can do that with us is you can go to our website at Illinois, or you can type in endpp.org to sign up to become a member or supporter, so you'll get action alert emails telling you about different events that we're hosting. In terms of the ballot, you can meet with your elected official to just talk about the fact that we're punishing people for a lifetime, and if you want to introduce them to us to talk more about the legislation that we're introducing to eliminate the barriers, that could be a connection. And then in terms of the buck, the unrestricted dollars is definitely something that we can leverage, because a lot of foundations don't fund advocacy work, which is what our organization does. And so we definitely could utilize those unrestricted dollars.
Thank you so much. I would like to thank SVP for hosting us in this space, allowing us to have authentic conversations. I am so honored and privileged to be the moderator for this amazing, esteemed panelist. So thank you guys for coming out and speaking to us. Friends, I would like to thank you guys for creating a collective impact. And at the end of the day, what we want to do is make positive change. And so we can continue to have conversation, but we have to put action behind it. Listen, we have this room until 7 o'clock. Please feel free to come up to your neighbor. Well, we're friends now, to ask any unsung questions, but let's continue to build together. I am Dartavius Dorsey, and I want to humbly thank you guys for being in this space. That concludes our program.